afternoon, and welcome to the Boise Metro Chamber's Legislative Update Series. I'm Tori Thomas, Community and Government Affairs Manager here at the Boise Metro Chamber, and your host for today's event. The Boise Metro Chamber is Idaho's only five-star accredited chamber and represents nearly 2,000 members. We are only able to provide events and educational content because of our members and their investment in our community. Before I introduce our panelists for today, I want to thank Optum Idaho for their generous support. Please enjoy this quick video from our sponsor.
As the daughter and granddaughter of veterans, I've seen the traumatic effect that war can have on someone. Many soldiers come home from war with wounds that are not always visible. Optum's Hello Idaho can help with free resources for veterans and their families to help recognize and deal with mental health issues, and by providing all Idahoans access to support for whole health. Learn more about free resources for veterans' health at optumidaho.com.
For today's legislative update, we are joined by Senator Geoff Schroeder. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Raised in Kamiah, Idaho, Senator Geoff Schroeder graduated from Kamiah High School and attended U of I. He served in the Idaho Army National Guard and retired after 21 years of active service. He received his BA in philosophy at Boise State and attended the U of I College of Law and was admitted into the Idaho State Bar. Senator Schroeder served on the Mountain Home City Council, served as the Elmore County Republican Party Precinct Committeeman, and the County Vice Chair. Senator Schroeder serves District 8 in the Idaho Legislature and sits on multiple committees, including local government and taxation as the Vice Chair. Thanks so much for your service to our state and the legislature and the Guard, and we're so happy to have you here today.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to be here and glad to take a few minutes to chat with you folks and see what you're interested in.
Yeah, awesome. Well, we appreciate that. I have to tell you, I got the opportunity to go up to Kamiah a few years ago. I picked up my dog there. She was a farm dog, but she wanted to be a princess in the city. So I made sure she lives in a house and has multiple beds, and she lives a very good life. But Kamiah was beautiful.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah.
It was forever. So
I'm sure. Yeah, it's absolutely beautiful up there. The drive was a little intense, but it's beautiful, and yeah, we had a fun little lunch at the diner in there, and yeah, it was a fun little trip.
Awesome.
Well, before we start officially getting to tax policy stuff, I just wanted to ask how you're doing. We're quite a ways into the session. How's it been for you? Have you noticed anything? How are you feeling?
I feel really good. It's intense. I could see how someone might get overwhelmed with the session and with all of the activities and all the stuff you need to be aware of and that you need to follow as it's going on. So you have to be kind of on your A game all the time. But it's refreshing to be able to devote just a huge chunk of my time to diving into serious and critical policy issues and being in the right place at the right time to provide key input to help guide or craft legislation or to tweak it a little bit. So it's been going. I'd say it's been going well. I've gotten to know and work much more closely with some of my colleagues, get to know them more. Some of my colleagues across the rotunda, and it's just in the House, and I really enjoy it, and I love this role as a state senator. So it's been
well.
going.
I'm happy to hear it's been going pretty well, and I appreciate your dedication to it. It's nice to hear that you're enjoying it and you appreciate the time there. So yeah, we're grateful for all that you guys are up to. Obviously, there's some contentious areas, but I think, at the end of the day, that it is hard work. It's complicated and it's important work, and it shows that you all care so much when there's tough conversations.
Thanks.
Well, let's jump in. Let's start with some urban renewal conversations. So the chamber's been urban renewal districts has been something that the chamber has been a part of. Those conversations, been engaged with for quite some time. I was hoping that maybe you could chat a little bit about a status of an urban renewal bill. I know there's been chatter and a couple drafts. Could you share with us an update on that?
No, I don't. Chatter and some drafts is all I've got.
Okay.
Uh, I don't know. I haven't been asked. I have heard some chatter about it, but I think my position on urban renewal in general is pretty clear. I know that the city of Mountain Home, where I've lived for 34 years, has what I would say is a wildly successful urban renewal district that is accomplishing the goals of the urban renewal statute, and it is not doing anything that stretches its meanings or definitions. That has led people to try to cabin in urban renewals over the years. And so I look at Mountain Homes as an example of one that is done right, and that is the guidepost that I use when urban renewal legislation comes before us in how it may harm one that is working correctly, in my view. And I think for most of the citizens, if you drive through Mountain Home today, you'll see a vibrant and beautiful redone downtown area, and that was done by our urban renewal agency. So
Awesome. That's great. I guess I'm new to the urban renewal world. I just jumped into when I worked at the chamber, this has been a conversation. I was hoping, I know it's a very complex conversation. Any chance that you could give like a very brief overview for our listeners on what an urban renewal was created for or how it works? I know that's kind of a big question to ask, but if you have a few words to share, I think it would be helpful for me and our listeners.
sure. So the overall viewpoint, and these efforts started in the 60s, was to take care of blight. And Boise City is been an early beneficiary and adopter of urban renewal agencies, and the source of a great deal of litigation that forms the case law in Idaho on urban renewal areas. And so what happens is you create an urban renewal agency. At one point, it could have been coextensive with the members of the city council. Now that's been restricted or curtailed. They create an area that is supposed to be redeveloped or renewed. And then there are areas that they can, what they get, they do called a revenue allocation area that cabins off the value of the urban renewal area that exceeds that which was at the base. So you start with the renewal area, and then it gets renewed, and then they increment the increase in value. That money, that tax revenue, goes to the urban renewal agency to fund more projects. So that's where sometimes the controversy lies, is the projects that the urban renewal agencies engage in. So there has been much policy debate over whether you can use urban renewal for public buildings instead of, improving infrastructure for the private sector, which is the source of tax revenue. So there have been efforts to, eliminate urban renewal areas or agencies altogether. There are, maybe examples where some people in this building believe that urban renewal agency power has been abused or has been used for improper purposes. That leads to the efforts to dial it back. So in essence, the grumbling is the tax increment of the new development or of the increase in value goes to the urban renewal agency to provide renewal and improvements in the area. And so there are those who think, well, we need that increment value and that tax revenue for all of the taxing districts that would normally be getting that revenue, but for the existence of the revenue allocation area. So that's kind of the nuts and bolts in a real very abbreviated version of how it works.
Awesome. Thank you for that. I know we were talking about our legislative updates, and I was thinking I could probably do a whole hour on just urban renewal, and it probably would just skim the top of what it does and what it has done for our state and for different areas. And so I appreciate that, abbreviate that little summary of it. And maybe we'll have you back to do a deep dive on it at some point.
Okay. I there might be someone better suited than I, but yeah, that's it kind of in a nutshell. So.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, we appreciate that. And yeah, we've been kind of keeping tabs on, if there's any conversations or any more than conversations going on. So we'll definitely keep an eye on that. The chamber appreciates those urban renewals. And so it'll be interesting to see kind of where it goes from here on out. So, well, we'll move on. There's been quite a few conversations and bills regarding libraries. You were a part of a collaboration on a bill. Can you kind of go into that and share us what's coming next? I know there was a recent bill that just came out. Can you share an update on your bill or your collaborated bill?
Sure. So the bill I collaborated with Representative Crane on basically provided a framework to resolve a dispute over whether or not a particular piece of material in a library was harmful to minors. And the one thing that Representative Crane and I agreed on right away is that other states have enacted statutes where they attempt to redefine material harmful to minors, and they end up doing so in a way that is unconstitutional. So we, and his initial bill 384 pointed somewhat at the definition of material harmful to minors contained in Idaho Code 18.15.14.6, which consists of the Miller test. And so working together, we decided that all discussions about material harmful to minors should point at that statute so that we don't get other extraneous factors or other ways to evaluate material. Everyone, everywhere in the state is looking at the same definition. That is really important because I have had to field questions for clients, city clients, about objections to library materials that were patently not harmful to minors as that term is described. And they made an attempt to say there were cartoon children who were, had articles of clothing off, and these were children playing in a sprinkler, and they're cartoon drawings. And so, but that wasn't really the issue. The person's objection to the book then went on to list this litany of things that were policy or political or racially motivated objections. And those aren't something that it's constitutionally permissible for the state to restrict. So that was our first area of like broad agreement. Let's get a consistent common definition. And then rather than roll straight into court with a dispute over a book, let's have a public process which allows the objector and other people in the community to provide evidence and list their objections, and then have the board at a public hearing render a written decision about whether or not the material does or doesn't meet that, and then make a decision about whether to segregate the material. And then if the dispute continues or the library continues to refuse, then you could roll into court. And that failed disappointingly by one vote in the Senate. And so we were left to kind of regroup. Representative Crane has brought a kind of modified version of 384. It's been introduced. It corrects some of the problems that were there with 384, which is it does the narrower version of defining material harmful to minors. Of concern to libraries, as the testimony showed, is that you say this book's objectionable, and then the library has 30 days to move it or to deem it that it isn't. And then that dispute, first brush at resolving it, apart from a board meeting or dialogue with the library, is in court. The plaintiff will have the burden to show that the material is harmful to minors as that term is defined in 15.14.6a. Um, so that's where that bill is now. I'm not a co-sponsor on it. I have talked to Representative Crane yesterday, basically kind of for the first time. I think he and I are in agreement in some areas. I'm not sure about others, but he has been absolutely awesome to work with in terms of understanding the issue, understanding the constitutional limitations, and what materials are and aren't, eligible for this treatment by the government. The government saying you shall move this material, or you'll have a cause of action. Um, that's a narrow universe of items, maybe narrower than some people would like, but this avoids, again, unconstitutional redefinitions of material harmful to minors, and we'll see how it goes. That's the update on my bill. It failed, and then he ran this one, and he and I'll have some discussions about whether I'll end up supporting it or not. So.
Awesome. Well, we appreciate that update. I think it's a really interesting topic when you start talking about harmful materials, and it's pretty subjective. So it's interesting, the route that you guys took to ensure that it's more of, everything has to fall into this for it to be considered harmful. And so we appreciate that work. And I think the chamber hasn't really engaged too much on the libraries. We obviously love libraries. We feel like they're very important to our community engagement, but we're focused a lot on the business community, and that, private right of action in some of them have been a little worrisome. But I think the way that you're going about it, of having the library take it on first, and try to figure a solution out, is really helpful to that.
I think one of the concerns is that libraries will be incentivized to preemptively move material. They don't necessarily have to remove it. And it was interesting in dealing with our cooperative bill that we did before. I engaged with some librarians who indicated that 90% of their conflict is dealt with at the counter with patron interaction, and I really think that's the case, in most instances. So it's but I think it's really, really important for folks discussing or debating this issue to have that statute up on the screen when they're talking about it, so you can see it. There's a little bit of subjectivity there, but it really is like you have to take the work as a whole. You can't take a single sentence or a single page. So there are a lot of examples that pop up that are single pages. Well, maybe that's it. Maybe it's a bunch of pages, but we don't know. But that's where I thought having a record of a library entity debating and deliberating on the status of a given work and then rendering a decision in writing would provide a good track record, particularly ultimately if it ended up in court. So I haven't studied the mechanics of Jaren's newest version in detail because, as I said at the beginning, it's intense and a whirlwind, and I'm running from meeting to meeting and committee to committee. So I grab these when I can and dive in.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think it'll be interesting to see where it all goes, and we appreciate all the work that's being done to, try to make sure our families feel heard, but also make sure that our libraries are taken care of, and they're able to, know the right, have some clarity on the process that they should be taking when it comes to these situations. So we'll be interested. That just came out this week, so it'll be interesting to see it kind of float towards in the next couple of weeks, see what happens with it as we kind of slowly close out the session. Well, so given your local government background and your current vice chair position, could you share with us any issues or efforts this session that would impact any locals?
Yes, so we just passed off the Senate floor Senate Bill 1293 as amended, which was a collaborative effort with Representative Young and Senator Julie Van Orden, and to some extent me helping tweak it over the summer, kind of restricting or curtailing cities' ability to annex involuntarily property. So it's kind of a wholesale rewrite of the annexation statute 50-222. So 50-222 was, the way it exists now, was kind of a very compromised or I don't know, collaborative. It was a work that happened as a result of a unilateral annexation in 1999 or 2000. And so this you can see through the legislative history, and then reading or trying to read and understand 50-222 what the different categories of annexation are, how it's supposed to work. It's to the point where Givens-Pursley's land use law manual has a chart so that you can try to understand it. And so what this bill will do if it passes the House, is but my main focus in helping the proponents of the bill was to make sure that the status quo for voluntary annexations remained, so that it didn't upend the ability, because the vast majority of the work that I do as an attorney for cities is voluntary, over-the-counter requested annexations. And then the second most frequent are those people who are outside the city limits that want city services and render to the city a recorded consent to annex upon contiguity. And it was important that those be preserved. And so the bill had some perhaps inartful language about requiring a consent, and current consent in addition to the prior recorded consent, and we cleaned that up. So then it boiled down to two major policy issues, which was the threshold for getting voters to consent to involuntary annexation for the whole batch. So you have a big group. So what's the percentage of landowners and the percentage of land mass, or the number of lots, and then the number of parcels that are completely surrounded by a city or enclaves that can be involuntary annexed as a matter of right. And so that number in this bill, the threshold for voting, went from the initial draft was 67%. It's now 60, rather than the statutorily existing 50%. And then the number of enclave parcels is being reduced from 100 to 30. There are 4 very large cities in Idaho who were opposed to this, because of the quantity of enclave parcels that they have not yet involuntarily annexed. But in my experience, the vast majority of cities, this doesn't really affect. So I stayed out of that part of the policy debate and just focused on, let's just make sure we don't mess up the voluntary annexation. There's another one Senator Lakey just passed on areas of city impact. Other ones I've had concern with are, I'm trying to think if there was any that, there was one that purported to be a working animal bill that came up that, would have simply eliminated every local ordinance governing any animal that fit in its definition of working animal, which was pretty close to every animal. So that one kind of went by the wayside. We have one coming up in local government here in an hour and a half that creates what are called agricultural protection areas. There's a robust, I think, meeting procedure and a declaration about that area and what can be done with it. There's some issues over the use of eminent domain inside there, so we'll see how that one fares. But primarily, there have been a couple of bills, I think one in the House, that I was kind of curious about prohibiting local governments from giving people a universal basic income, which I don't see there's any statutory authorization for them to do so now. In other words, it would be my legal advice to a city that you couldn't provide citizens an income, because that's just giving public money to private citizens. But I haven't dug into that legally too much. But anyway, that one I thought, well, that seems odd. But I think it follows on some cities in other states that are providing minimum basic incomes to their residents. Nothing else really jumps off the page at me that actually had some serious merit coming forward that would affect locals. We do have one that that I'm bringing on on the ability of a local government like a county or a city to dictate where their whether contracted or their own waste haulers haul solid waste. So if a city contracts with ABC Garbage Company, this would prohibit them from reaching down into the contract and saying, oh, by the way, you have to use this particular landfill. The private garbage hauling company is free to pick whichever landfill is the most cost effective for them, rather than being ordered to use a specific one. So that one doesn't give me concern. In fact, it helps, I think, alleviate some concerns about conglomerations of counties making regional landfills and then ordering Lottie Dottie and everybody to use them versus what could be more cost effective. I have a friend who's in a business in the northern part of the state who has three options to take all of the garbage for those three counties: Clarkston, Washington, Payette, Idaho, or Missoula, Montana. And although Clarkston is geographically closer, it is nowhere near as cost effective as it is for him to take the garbage to those other two places. So anyway, those are the things that jump off the page at me as affecting. Of course, the library bill would affect locals as well. I think. Oh, there was another one. I think it gave me a little trouble about public input at school board meetings. The school boards, I think, ended up not being terribly opposed to it, but I have trouble mandating public input. I could see doing it maybe periodically or episodically, but tying adoption of ordinances or agenda items to having had the opportunity for public input, I think, kind of hamstrings the ability of people to run efficient meetings when they just need to conduct a business and get done. So.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. Those were great bills to keep an eye on for people, or, great conversations for people to know about. Interesting about landfill. I never thought about that, someone would try to regulate that and it might be more cost effective to go somewhere else. And then, the public input on school boards, I'll definitely keep an eye on that as well. So great. Well, we appreciate all of that information. I think it's great for people to know kind of what's going on, especially in that world. And I'm sure your law degree helps a lot with looking into all of these, because a lot of that went over my head, I will be honest.
Sure. Well, a lot of this I'll save this for the tail end, but yeah, it's not just a law degree. It's part of it's the philosophy degree and catching little hidden conjunctions and phrases and sentences in bills that could cause trouble later. So that's part of what I try to catch. I biffed it on one last year for development impact fees, and we're trying to fix that one, but it's on the Development Impact Fee Advisory Committee. We have a complicated animal outside of town here, and we got to figure out how to statutorily name those members of that Development Impact Fee Advisory Committee so that they can cross both the district and then every jurisdiction that's in it. And this one has five jurisdictions, cities, counties, and a fire district. So anyway.
Interesting. Yeah, there's so many, unintended consequences sometimes when you're looking through a bill, or it goes through, and then you're like, oh wow, that's didn't really intend for that to happen, but it's here. So I think all the work that you can put into it and all your knowledge with that is probably really helpful and very useful for the state. So we appreciate that knowledge. Well, let's dive into House Bill 521. The local government and taxation committee just passed it. Can you break that bill down just a little bit for our listeners if they're not quite aware of what that does? And then kind of what the temperature is on it going forward?
Sure. So the off the cuff without the bill in front of me, and I'm going to miss something here, but it does a number of things. That it creates a school facilities modernization fund. So I'll just preface it with um, the Idaho Constitution says that the stability of a Republican form of government, depending mainly on the intelligence of the people, it shall be the duty of the legislature of the state of Idaho to establish and maintain a general, uniform, and thorough system of free common public schools. And so the uniformity piece of that, there's a mandate that the school system be uniform throughout the state, has been litigated in that there is a lack of uniformity in an ability of a local taxing entity or a typical county or school district to get sufficient bonding ability to keep its facilities adequate for the students. And so the court said you're failing in that. You're not following your constitutional duty of uniformity because it's by happenstance of property value that a local entity is able to maintain or build new facilities. And so what 521 was intended by the governor to do was to start a facilities modernization fund at the state level and have the state be a more active participant in funding and maintaining or improving substandard facilities throughout the state. So that's the overall goal, which is consistent with the Constitution. So it shouldn't be up to local property taxpayers or the whims of an election or the limitations on a local board to sell a bond to its voters to be able to get these critical and necessary fixes done to our schools. So that's kind of the first piece. It then allocates various tax revenue streams toward this modernization fund and then uses average daily attendance to say this is how much you're going to get. It takes that money and leverages it by giving the state the ability to bond. The state can bond on it. So the state uses its bonding authority to then in essence give 10 times the money to make that available to those districts and then distribute it according to average daily attendance. It has some other provisions in that schools that are on less than a 5-day week are incentivized to return to a 5-day week, or they sit out having the funds, or if they're going to continue with the 4-day week. And then I think this is important and was lost in some of the dialogue. Maybe if you read the bill carefully with respect to that, they can continue with the 4-day week as long as they continue to adhere to the hours or days established by the State Department of Education through rule. So they're still able to do it. It may change the number of days that their school year is, as long as they provide the total number of hours. Whether they do it 5 days a week or 4, they're still able to. But it may end up being a longer school year. That part is, the mechanics of that are yet to be seen in the rule through the State Department of Education. And then the other part is I think 1.25% reduction in income tax. So that's kind of the 30,000 foot level. It will make available ranges of funds from $80,000 to $180,000 or so to a small school, to some of the bigger schools getting a lot more. I think Mountain Home gets maybe something like 14 million. It may or may not be enough to build another building. I think it also creates a facilities committee that then drafts up some standard designs. So I need a 3rd grade classroom or a building that will house 4 more classrooms. Well, here's plan set A, and it works in all the different districts throughout the state. And how much it's going to cost, who can build it, and this sort of thing. The temperature for it among legislators seems to be pretty good. There are people who have concerns about how much stuff is packed into it, whether it violates the constitutional single subject rule or not. It doesn't look to me like given the case law that I've read, that it would. But it certainly does ring the bell on, maybe there are topics that aren't as well related as they ought to be, but it's ultimately up to the body passing it. But I think it has a very high likelihood of success.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that breakdown. We've been, kind of talking about that throughout this session. We've been very supportive of when the governor mentioned that in his State of the State, and we're happy to see that it's, trying to make it to the finish line. It's constitutional, and it just makes sense to make sure that the buildings and the properties that kids are learning in would be maintained so that they can feel safe and encouraged to just keep growing in there and keep learning. So we appreciate all the work that's being done, and we'll be intrigued to see as it continues. Well, I think that concludes all of my questions for today. It looks like we did get a question discussing the election year and a possible new election voter guide. You want to talk to us a little bit about election, what you're looking at, how the conversations are because it's election year?
So the voter guide, I think, passed. Now I'm trying to remember if it was a House bill or Senate bill, but we voted for it. So the state would provide a voter guide. I'm in favor of that. I think it will help. It will help because you have a lot of sources of information, and some are, paid for by people who have an outcome in mind. And some are simply people who are collecting information and want to relay it to voters. This is what Mr. Schroeder said about this. And some are, clearly slanted. You have extremely suspect ratings rating entities that try to skew things, who try to claim that Bill X, Y, or Z is the be-all, end-all of a certain tenet of political truth. Those I think are unhelpful. I don't read any of the way the bills are rated. I evaluate the bills based on what I think they do and how well they meet what their goal is, and that sort of thing. So, but I think the voter guide provided by the Secretary of State's office will be useful and helpful, particularly if every voter gets it and every voter gets it in time for the general election. We might, I can't remember if this one will also be useful for the primary, but it's been, it seems like it was a while ago we passed it, but it could have been 4 days ago, the way as fast as things go here. So I can't recall. So.
Yeah, that's awesome. I was at the hearing for that, and honestly, I can't tell you when that was either. So, but I was really excited to see that come through. I think you're right. I think there's a lot of opportunity to put in some biases or even just some unnecessary information, and I think this one will be just very factual and really helpful. I'm really happy that I get to be in a position where I'm surrounded with politics, and so I can do a lot of research, but I'm always pushing my younger siblings to get to the polls, and so I'm really excited that they'll have a guide to do that, and they can make educated decisions and choices, and I'm excited to see what that comes, and I think it'll be really helpful for the legislators that are being elected. So well, thank you so much for your time today. I did want to kind of close out with a question for you. I encourage our members and the community to reach out to their legislators and to say thanks, but also to share their concerns about anything. Is there any other way that you would encourage people to get involved and to know more about the legislature and the session and all that goes on during these few months?
So my phone right here in my Senate office. Let's see here. Well, I don't have any voicemails on it, but I listen to every voicemail, and then depending on the tone or whatever, even the combative and hostile ones, I will generally call them back. Even if they don't leave a number, I have a way to look the number up. And so engaging with your legislators in a meaningful way, face-to-face contact. Emails to the Senate account tend to get drowned out in barrages. I've gotten at least 300 emails on one or more of the concurrent resolutions on a convention of states. And when I say 300, I've gotten many more than 300 on that topic, but I've gotten 300 from everywhere but Idaho, 300 from Kentucky and Louisiana and Georgia, and these people making a demand of me. So an email that's from a constituent in my district that is not a canned email, that has a recognizable subject, like, hey, I need to talk to you about X, Y, or Z, is the most impactful way. And then I can either agree with what you're telling me, I can give you the bad news, you can persuade me. I change my mind sometimes, depending on what the issue is. So you can get involved that way. Testifying on bills, sometimes I have sent an ask, like, please come. I need to hear how this will affect, our committee needs to hear how this will affect you. So those are some ways. Just coming in the building and hanging out and meeting people. I was working for the law firm I work for now in a consulting role before I got my law degree, and in addition to having a passion for local government as a city council person, I was frequently in this building interacting with not just my legislators, but other legislators, and testifying in front of committees. And just getting up and saying your piece if you have a thought on a bill. I've been sitting in a hearing and thought, well, I think I'll get up and testify on this. I hadn't planned on it. That's just good. This is where the state government and your local government at your city level and county level is the best, most responsive, and most effective form of government. So there are times when it looks frustrating. It looks like the books are cooked and the thing's going. And frankly, sometimes that's true. That there's no other way to put it. But there are other times when people are on the bubble, they're thinking about things, and they want and need to hear your input. And so I'll generally take, if I have a free minute, I guess part of the intensity of this is my own fault, because I will generally take a call or take an audience or chat with somebody. But I find it helpful both to listen to what the needs and concerns are, and then to relay those concerns to my colleagues as we try to render a decision.
Well, thank you for taking that time for your constituents, and even today, we really appreciate that time. And I can tell, being in the Capitol so often this session, I've gotten to hear so many hearings, and there's been so many of you legislators that truly take a second to say, whoa, we've had so many people in opposition or even people in support. I think we should keep discussing and have these conversations with the people that are doing the thing that we are, voting against or for. So I can tell there's so many of you that truly do respect that. And we really appreciate your time. So thanks for all you're doing for our state and for joining us today.
You bet. Glad to do it.
Yeah. Awesome. Oh, sorry. Go for it.
Any other questions I can answer, or?
I think we're doing pretty good. Yeah. I think you got all of my questions. If there's anything else, did you want to share anything, or from your perspective, or?
Oh, I'll just start babbling. So
that's my problem too. Well, thanks to our viewers for tuning in today. Thank you to our sponsor, Optum, as well as our media partners, Idaho Ed News, Idaho Capital Sun, Idaho Press, and Idaho Statesman. Thanks again, and we'll see you guys next episode.